There's a pattern in military history that has destroyed three world powers over the last 6 centuries, and today the United States is following that same trajectory with alarming precision. What makes this so disturbing is that the pattern unfolds in predictable stages: slow erosion, mass decline, sudden shock, irreversible collapse. Each empire believed it was too powerful to fall. Each one reached a point where reputation kept carrying them long after their real capabilities had hollowed out. And in 2025, the United States appears to be entering the very stage where the myth of military dominance begins to fracture. To understand how this happens, you need to look back at three pivotal moments where superpowers that seemed untouchable were shattered almost overnight. Rome in 378 AD, France in 1940, the Soviet Union in 1979. In each case, a military that the world believed was invincible was exposed as fragile, outdated, and internally compromised. And in each case, the shock was not just military, it transformed the global order. Rome, the empire that controlled 3 continents, suffered a single catastrophic defeat at Adrianople and began a slide that ended with its capital sacked and its army ruined. France, proud of its vast army and fortified defenses, collapsed in just 6 weeks when confronted by a faster, more adaptive opponent. The Soviet Union, seemingly unshakable with its nuclear arsenal and massive military machine, humiliated itself in Afghanistan and disintegrated 2 years after withdrawing. These were not isolated failures. They were warning signs embedded in a repeating script. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The United States is not at the beginning of this pattern. It is already deep into stage 4. That is the same stage where Rome realized its legions were no longer feared, where France discovered its military doctrine was obsolete, and where the Soviet Union learned that sheer size cannot compensate for internal decay. America still commands alliances, air power, technology, and global bases, but beneath the image of strength, serious fractures have emerged. Military decline never begins with a battlefield disaster. It begins quietly, internally. Budgets are trimmed under the banner of efficiency. Recruitment falters, explained away as a cultural issue instead of a systemic failure. Equipment ages while procurement becomes tangled in politics and bureaucracy. Training standards are lowered to meet quotas. And yet, the institution maintains a facade, powerful speeches, impressive parades, vast global presence. The image persists long after the capability is degraded. Then comes a moment of truth, a conflict that reveals everything. A fight that should have been easy becomes a grinding struggle. An enemy assumed to be inferior proves unexpectedly lethal. A battle exposes weaknesses that have been ignored for years. That is when allies start hedging their bets and adversaries grow bold. Power projection flips into vulnerability, and once the illusion cracks, it never fully recovers. That is exactly what happened to Rome. For centuries, the legions were the backbone of imperial power. Professional soldiers, standardized training, disciplined formations, they were unmatched. But by 350 AD, the system that had sustained Rome was breaking down. Citizenship had expanded so broadly that the old military culture eroded. People across far-flung provinces felt little personal loyalty to Rome and even less desire to fight for it. Recruitment plummeted. To compensate, Rome began hiring foreign mercenaries, Germanic tribes, Goths, Huns, warriors who served for money, not identity. This shift hollowed out the Roman military from the inside. Training shortened. Equipment quality declined because standardized gear cost too much. Armor became lighter, not to improve mobility, but because iron was expensive. Discipline, once Rome's defining strength, weakened, yet the reputation of the legions endured. Enemies still remembered how devastating Rome used to be, and that memory bought the empire another century of psychological advantage. But reputation is not a shield. It delays the reckoning, nothing more. The collapse came suddenly at Adrianople. The Eastern Emperor Valens, misjudging the strength of the Goths, charged into battle without proper reconnaissance. The legions were encircled, annihilated, and Valens himself was killed. Rome had suffered defeats before, but nothing like this. Adrianople shattered the myth, and the consequences were immediate. Barbarian tribes grew bold, Alliances fractured, and Rome's enemies realized the empire could be beaten. When Alaric the Visigoth sacked Rome just 32 years later, the psychological impact was more devastating than the physical destruction. The Western Empire staggered on for a few decades, but it was effectively finished the moment its military credibility collapsed. The pattern is unmistakable: peak strength, internal decay masked by reputation, shocking defeat, cascading loss of influence, and eventual collapse. More than a millennium later, France repeated the script. After World War I, France possessed the most respected army in Europe. Its commanders were considered the finest strategists of the age. The Maginot Line, a colossal fortress system, embodied French confidence: modern, impenetrable, technologically sophisticated. But France made the same fatal error Rome made. It mistook the past for the future. Instead of adapting to new forms of warfare, France prepared to fight the last war again. The army was large but rigid, well-equipped but slow, brave but inflexible. Germany, by contrast, reinvented warfare with speed, coordination, and mechanized tactics. In 6 weeks, the myth of French invincibility collapsed. The world did not just witness France's defeat, it witnessed the fall of a military paradigm. France went from great power to occupied puppet state almost overnight because its doctrine, culture, and leadership had fossilized. Each of these cases teaches the same lesson: military power is not static. It decays faster than anyone expects, especially when an empire mistakes reputation for reality. And that is the danger now facing the United States. For decades, America's dominance, its carriers, satellites, air power, alliances has shaped the global order. But internal indicators point to the same quiet corrosion: recruitment shortfalls, aging fleets, procurement failure, declining readiness, rising costs, and a widening gap between technological ambition and practical capability. What makes this moment particularly dangerous is that America's adversaries have studied the pattern. They understand that superpowers weaken slowly, but break suddenly. They know that once the illusion cracks, the world realigns with astonishing speed. The United States still possesses enormous military resources, but history shows that resources alone do not prevent collapse, only adaptation does. And adaptation is the one thing empires consistently refuse to do until it is too late. Britain trusted French strength. Poland depended on French guarantees. Belgium believed French assurances because the French military still seemed like the anchor of European security. Yet beneath that confidence, the reality was much weaker than the image projected abroad. The world saw the France of 1918 disciplined, resilient, triumphant. But the French military of 1940 was a different institution entirely, one that had failed to adapt, update, or innovate. Its doctrine was frozen in the past, trapped in the logic of static defense, slow mobilization, and the grinding attrition of trench warfare. It had not absorbed the lessons of mechanization, mobility, or rapid combined arms warfare. France possessed tanks, but it did not know how to use them. Instead of grouping them into armored spearheads capable of independent action, the French dispersed them to support infantry, essentially turning one of the most revolutionary tools of modern warfare into glorified mobile pillboxes. While Germany experimented, refined, and boldly implemented fast, integrated mechanized assaults, France clung to outdated assumptions. The Germans concentrated tanks into divisions, supported them with mobile infantry and close air support, and developed a doctrine centered on speed, coordination, and surprise. Blitzkrieg was not magic. It was simply modern warfare executed by a military that had reinvented itself for a new era. Numerically, France was not weak. It had more tanks, more artillery, and a large, battle-experienced officer corps. But strength on paper means nothing if the thinking behind it is obsolete. The French command structure was slow and bureaucratic, dependent on rigid plans rather than adapting to reality. German officers, meanwhile, operated under a doctrine that allowed initiative and rapid decision-making. In moments of chaos, flexibility beats tradition every time. When Germany launched its invasion, the world expected another long war of attrition. Instead, the German army bypassed the Maginot Line entirely, pushing through the Ardennes, a force the French declared impassable for armored divisions. This was not simply a tactical oversight. It was a mental blind spot, the result of leaders substituting belief for evidence. When German panzers broke through, French defenses collapsed almost immediately. Within days, German forces had split the French and British armies, forcing the British evacuation at Dunkirk. The French government abandoned Paris. Within 6 weeks, the French military once celebrated as the strongest in Europe was annihilated, not just defeated, but disintegrated. The speed of the collapse was not due to German superiority in weapons, but to a catastrophic mismatch in doctrine, leadership, and adaptability. France had been coasting on reputation for 2 decades, convinced that victory in the First World War guaranteed dominance in the next. But reputation becomes a curse when it blinds a nation to reality. When exposed to a modern, flexible, innovative enemy, the French war machine revealed itself as outdated and brittle. After 1940, France never regained its former status. It was liberated by Allied armies, not by its own. And as a military power, it has remained second tier ever since. This brings us to the third example, one even more recent and deeply illustrative: the Soviet Union's descent from superpower to collapse. In the late 1970s, the Soviet military appeared overwhelming. Millions of soldiers, tens of thousands of tanks, vast stockpiles of artillery, and a nuclear arsenal that rivaled America's. Their invasions of Hungary and Czechoslovakia had crushed resistance in a matter of hours or days. From the outside, the USSR looked like an impregnable colossus. But appearance is not reality. Internally, the Soviet military was plagued by corruption, low morale, poor training, and a brittle command system incapable of improvisation. Conscripts served because they were forced to, not because they believed in the mission. Drug use, hazing, desertion, and incompetence were widespread. Equipment broke down constantly. Commanders lied upward to protect their careers. An entire institution relied on a structure that punished initiative. When the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, they expected a quick victory, install a communist government, stabilize the region, and withdraw. Instead, they walked into a decade-long nightmare. Their conventional tactics, bombing villages, occupying major cities, controlling highways, were useless against guerrilla fighters who melted into the mountains. The Mujahideen, supported by American and Pakistani intelligence, adapted quickly. They ambushed supply lines, destroyed convoys, shot down helicopters, and made the cost of occupation intolerably high. The Soviets could win battles, but they could not win the war. And worse, the conflict exposed the rot inside the military. By the time Soviet troops finally withdrew, the myth of Soviet military power had been destroyed. If the mighty Red Army could not conquer Afghanistan, how could it maintain an empire stretching across Eastern Europe? Once that question entered the global conversation, the collapse accelerated. Eastern Europe revolted. The Berlin Wall fell. The Warsaw Pact dissolved. And in 1991, the Soviet Union itself ceased to exist. Military failure did not simply weaken the empire, it triggered its end. 3 great powers, 3 collapses, each following the same sequence. Now that we understand these historical cases, the pattern becomes clearer. Each empire passed through the same 6 stages, and recognizing these stages is essential to understanding where the United States stands today. The first stage is peak military power. At this point, the military is genuinely dominant, its technology is advanced, its morale strong, its recruitment steady, and its enemies cautious. Allies feel secure because guarantees are backed by real capability. Rome in the early 2nd century, France after World War I, the Soviet Union after World War II, and the United States in the 1990s all fit this stage perfectly. Stage 2 is the quiet internal decline. Budgets get trimmed under the pretense of efficiency. Recruitment struggles emerge. Standards drop. Equipment ages without replacement. Training deteriorates. Bureaucracy expands. Innovation slows. Leaders insist everything is fine, but anyone inside the system sees the cracks forming. For the United States, this began around the mid-2000s. Stage 3 is when reputation carries the military even though capability has eroded. The world still respects the superpower, but internally the truth is well-known readiness is questionable, morale shaky, and the gap between image and reality widening. This is a dangerous stage because it creates overconfidence externally and denial internally. America reached this stage by the early 2020s. Stage 4 is the moment of truth, the first major defeat. A mission that should be easy becomes a disaster. A smaller, supposedly inferior enemy exposes the weaknesses the institution refused to acknowledge. Allies suddenly question security guarantees. Adversaries become emboldened. The powerful discover that power is only real if it works in practice, not just on paper. And that is the stage the United States now appears to be entering. When a superpower reaches stage 4, the illusion ends. Enemies see weakness clearly for the first time. The reputation that protected the empire for decades evaporates almost instantly. Rome's shattering loss at Adrianople, France's humiliation in 1940, the Soviet collapse following Afghanistan, each was a moment when the world collectively realized the giant can bleed. The United States had its own moment in 2021. The Afghanistan withdrawal did not simply end a war. It punctured the aura of American military competence that had endured since the end of the Cold War. What had once been unquestioned was now openly doubted. Stage 5 is a cascade period when the consequences of that first major defeat rip through the entire system. Every empire that reached this stage faced a rapid acceleration of crises. Allies began hedging. Some quietly shifted allegiance. Others simply lost faith. Enemies, seeing opportunity, tested boundaries everywhere at once. A once feared military becomes a global question mark. Can it still guarantee peace? Can it defend allies? Can it project power? And if the answer is not a confident yes, then in geopolitics, it is effectively a no. Rome spiraled through this period between 400 and 450 AD, suffering multiple sacks and losing territories that had been secure for centuries. France lost its entire colonial empire and never regained strategic independence after 1940. The Soviet Union crumbled in less than 2 years as Eastern Europe broke free the moment the Red Army's aura dissolved. Stage 5 is where empires discover that decline does not happen gradually, it happens catastrophically, once the facade breaks. Stage 6 is the final stage. The empire can no longer project power beyond its borders. The military that once enforced its will around the world becomes unable to secure even its closest interests. Foreign bases close. Alliances dissolve or transform. Enemies act without fear because the superpower's deterrent credibility is gone. The empire retreats to its core territory and becomes a regional power or disappears. Rome in 476 AD. France after World War II. The USSR in 1991. Each followed the same trajectory. And the uncomfortable truth is that the United States, unless it reverses course, will face the same reckoning in the future. 3 empires, 6 stages, identical sequence. Some collapsed slowly, others in a single sweeping wave. Rome took a century to fall from stage 4 to stage 6. France needed barely a year. The Soviet Union required only 2. The pace is accelerating because the world moves faster, technology moves faster, and public trust erodes faster. Once legitimacy cracks, collapse spreads like fire through dry timber. The United States stands now at stage 4, and the evidence is overwhelming. Stage 1 peak power was unmistakably 1991. The Gulf War was not just a victory. It was a demonstration of unprecedented military dominance. In 100 hours, the U.S. devastated the 4th largest army in the world. Precision-guided munitions, unmatched logistics, overwhelming air superiority. This was the height of American capability. The U.S. could wage 2 major wars simultaneously and win both. No other military came close. This was the apex. Stage 2 began quietly around 2005, masked by rhetoric and the illusion of endless superiority. The long wars in Iraq and Afghanistan strained the force. Equipment wore out faster than it could be replaced. Astronomical budgets created an illusion of strength, but most of that money went into maintaining existing operations rather than preparing for future conflict. The F-22 program, the most advanced fighter on Earth, was cut prematurely. The Navy shrank from its Cold War fleet of nearly 600 ships to fewer than 300. Leaders reassured the public that technological superiority compensated for shrinking forces. But behind closed doors, readiness was slipping. By 2020, America had fully entered Stage 3. The world still believed in American military invincibility. China avoided direct confrontation. Russia kept its distance. NATO allies publicly expressed confidence in U.S. guarantees. Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan relied heavily on American protection. Yet, internally, the problems were undeniable. Recruitment steadily declined. Standards softened. Equipment aged without meaningful replacement. The Air Force still flew aircraft older than the pilots commanding them. The Navy's fleet was the smallest it had been in a century. The disparity between reputation and reality was widening dangerously. Then Afghanistan happened, and the illusion collapsed. 20 years of war, $2 trillion spent, and the most technologically advanced military in history was unable to prevent a total Taliban takeover. The Afghan army, which the U.S. had trained and equipped for 2 decades, dissolved almost instantly. The Taliban captured the capital in 11 days. The images from Kabul's airport crowds clinging to aircraft, desperate families, the deaths of U.S. service members became symbols of a superpower in disarray. Billions of dollars in equipment were left behind. The Taliban, for the first time in history, possessed more advanced gear than many U.S. allies. The world saw not just a withdrawal, but a collapse of American credibility. This was America's Adrianople moment when global perception changed overnight. Rivals measured the gap between image and reality and saw opportunity. China accelerated its pressure on Taiwan. Russia tested the boundaries in Ukraine. Iran increased regional aggression. Every adversary understood what history has shown repeatedly. A superpower that fails a basic test invites further challenges. And these warning signs are not limited to Afghanistan. They are systemic, structural, and visible across every domain. Recruitment is in crisis. The military consistently misses its targets by large margins. Equipment is aging catastrophically. B-52 bombers from the 1950s still form a core part of U.S. air power. Intercontinental ballistic missiles built in the 1970s are still active. The average age of Air Force aircraft is higher than at any point since its founding. The Navy is forced to keep half-century-old carriers deployed because replacements are years behind schedule. Procurement, the system responsible for building the military's future, has become a labyrinth of delays and cost overruns. The F-35 program is billions over budget, years late, and still struggle with performance issues. While America struggles to build a single new carrier, China launches 3 in the same period. Their shipyards operate at an industrial pace the U.S. cannot match. China's Navy already surpasses the U.S. in sheer number of vessels, and the gap widens every year. Force structure is shrinking across the board. The Army is at its smallest active duty strength in decades. The Air Force fields fewer planes than at any time in its history. The Navy cannot meet global commitments with a 290-ship fleet. And while quantity is not everything, the U.S. is not compensating with quality. Either readiness has deteriorated so much that at any moment, half of all Air Force fighters are not mission capable. Even the massive $800+ billion defense budget is misleading. Much of it goes to personnel costs, healthcare, pensions, and sustaining aging equipment rather than modernization. Big numbers hide deeper problems. Every indicator that preceded the collapse of Rome, France, and the Soviet Union is present now. Declining recruitment, aging equipment, shrinking forces, procurement failures, readiness shortfalls, and widening gaps between reputation and reality. And just as history shows, once Stage 4 is reached, the path to Stage 5 accelerates. If the United States does not reverse course rapidly, decisively, and structurally, its trajectory will mirror the empires that came before it. Only a fraction of the U.S. defense budget, about 20%, actually goes to modernization. The rest is consumed by personnel costs, operations, and maintenance. We spend more than any nation on Earth, yet our ability to project power is shrinking because the structure is broken. A global empire with global commitments is now supported by a force spread so thin that it is strong nowhere. Meanwhile, adversaries are rapidly advancing. China has operational hypersonic missiles capable of sinking carriers, and the U.S. still lacks a reliable defense. Russia's electronic warfare jams American communications and GPS systems. U.S. drones are being shot down in conflicts where America is not even directly involved. For decades, technology gave the U.S. a decisive edge. Now that edge is fading, and in key areas reversing. Morale is deteriorating. Suicide rates are the highest they have ever been. Talent is bleeding out of the force as experienced officers and NCOs leave for civilian careers. Trust in leadership is eroding. Internal political battles distract from warfighting readiness. These are the same internal fractures that hollowed out Roman legions and Soviet divisions before collapse. Yet despite all this, America's reputation still holds barely. Allies continue to rely on U.S. guarantees, but they are quietly preparing for a world where those guarantees might fail. Saudi Arabia is pivoting toward China. The UAE is buying Russian hardware. South Korea is building the foundations of its own nuclear deterrent. Europe is openly discussing strategic autonomy because they no longer trust Washington to protect them. The image of American power still exists, but it is becoming just that, an image. And once the image cracks, once allies and enemies alike believe America can no longer uphold its commitments, Stage 5 begins. Stage 5 is a cascade. When illusion breaks, tests won't come one at a time. They will come everywhere at once. China moves on Taiwan. Russia pushes deeper into Ukraine or pressures the Baltics. Iran disrupts the Strait of Hormuz. North Korea escalates against South Korea. And the brutal truth is this: the U.S. cannot respond to all of these simultaneously. The Navy does not have the ships. The Air Force does not have the planes. The Army does not have the manpower. And the stockpiles are not deep enough to sustain multiple major conflicts. Pentagon war games against China in a Taiwan scenario consistently show the same outcome. The U.S. loses not because China is invincible, but because America can't move forces quickly enough, can't protect carriers, and can't replace losses at the speed required. Lose one carrier, and the myth of American naval invincibility evaporates. This is a historical pattern unfolding in real time. Stage for exposed weakness has already happened. Afghanistan was America's Adrianople, a moment when the world saw the gap between reputation and reality. Stage 5 is a rush of simultaneous challenges. Stage 6 is when the superpower stops being a superpower. History shows how fast this happens. Rome had 32 years between Adrianople and the sack of Rome. The USSR collapsed 2 years after Afghanistan. France fell in 6 weeks. Every cycle accelerates because modern communication spreads information and fear instantly. So how long does America have? 5 years. 10. No one can say precisely, but the trajectory is unmistakable. And once the cascade begins, it moves faster than anyone expects. Allies drift away. Adversaries advance. Bases close. Commitments are abandoned, and the military retreats to defending only the homeland. That is Stage 6, the end of global dominance. This outcome is not guaranteed, but preventing it requires something no declining military power in history has successfully done: admitting the weakness early enough and restructuring before the collapse. Rome failed to do it. France failed to do it. The Soviet Union failed to do it. Each believed their reputation made them untouchable. Each discovered too late that reputation cannot substitute for capability. The United States now stands in the same position, same warning signs, same denial, same pattern. Stage 4 is behind us. Stage 5 is approaching. Stage 6 follows quickly. The question is no longer whether the pattern applies. The question is how rapidly it unfolds, and whether anyone in power is willing to confront reality before it is too late.